When friends turn lovers, it can be a thrilling twist of fate, especially if their love is happening in secret.
He was in love with her, and she was in love with him.
They began to explore all the different opportunities and wanted a fresh start together.
But when one or both are still attached, things can take a dark and dangerous turn.
He could have just said, I don't want to be with you no more. But instead, he chose to stay and play both sides. She takes his phone, she goes through it.
What she finds is racy text messages. What she finds are flirtatious photos.
And a broken heart can lead to blinding rage.
She would do anything for the love of her man.
I will murder you. I will murder you.
It was a pure ambush.
They basically set my sister up.
And behind him not being honest, he ruined the life of, like, a lot of people. Was it?
August 11th, 2022. It's a hot and humid afternoon in Beaufort, Georgia, a quiet suburb 40 miles north of Atlanta.
Beaufort, Georgia is in Gwinnett County. It is the next largest county in the state of Georgia, next to Fulton County. They have a very diverse group of residents there. It's a very quiet town. People are able to go get their groceries, come home, have their children play freely. It's close to the city, but gives you enough rural feel to feel as though you're in the suburbs.
Beaufort's residents also benefit from a lower crime rate.
I think that if there's any violence in the streets of Beaufort, it is rare because it is a pretty quiet community, pretty peaceful.
But that peace and quiet is about to be shattered. Around 2 p.m., a 911 call comes into the Gwinnett County Police Department from an ER nurse at a nearby hospital.
Gwinnett Police, how can I help you?
Hey, I'm calling to report an assault on one of my patients who just came to the ER.
Nursing staff was so alarmed by what had happened that they reached out to 911.
Do you know what type of assault it was? Was it
It was a physical assault.
The victim had been brought to the hospital by her boyfriend. Despite her serious condition, she manages to speak with police from her hospital bed, identifying herself as Ashley Bocanegra.
So, what happened?
It was my fiance's birthday. So I went to go with some parents to go, grab him a cake and stuff like that. So I was outside waiting for my Uber. I see these two females walking around. They look kind of iffy, like I didn't think anything of it. And then they spotted me. All I hear is, that matching matches the description. And then out of nowhere, 17 and attacked me.
She thought it was a case of a mistaken identity. She didn't know why they did it.
You were outside waiting for a cat. Females randomly attacked you for no reason.
Ashley struggles to respond.
She didn't know how bad her injuries were, but you could tell they were pretty bad.
What kind of injuries do you have right now?
I got right back to my feet, right back to my arm, cuts to my leg, cuts to my neck. The girl got up and freaking slung a lot in the back of my head. And she was literally sitting on me while she was swinging on me, and the other girl just get the crap out of me.
Despite the serious nature of the assault, Ashley says she doesn't want to press charges.
You don't want the police involved? You don't want anything documented? You just want to go about your way? Okay. Well, I really hope you feel better, and if you have any more questions for me, just call the Gwinnett County Police Department.
But she would not feel better soon. Minutes after hanging up with police, her condition takes a drastic turn for the worse. Doctors discover she's suffering from internal bleeding, and she needs emergency surgery to survive.
They had to airlift her to another hospital. She declined fast, and she unfortunately passed away before they could even operate on her for the internal bleeding.
Ashley Bocanegra is transported to the medical examiner for an autopsy.
It all happened so fast. 1 minute, she was talking to police, and the next, she was suddenly gone.
30-year-old Ashley Bocanegra was a New York native and mother to a 7-year-old son who she shared with her boyfriend, Julian Reyes.
She was a good person. She was very lovable. She'll give you the shirt off of her back. But Ashley did have a little attitude when she don't like you, you know what I'm saying? You know when she don't like you, you know? So, but she ain't never go looking for problems. She was a beautiful person.
She was very funny, a very sweet personality, but feisty at the same time.
Ashley grew up in the South Bronx, and life was tough from the start.
I'm her older sister / mama. Me and Ashley was raised in foster care from babies. Ashley was 4, I was 6 when we got taken away. My mom was having, you know, difficulties doing things that she wasn't supposed to. So me and Ashley, we was in the system.
In foster care, Ashley's big sister became her lifeline.
So me and Ashley, we had to fight basically most of our life, you know. I basically took care of her until she got a little older.
Years later, Ashley was back home with their mother and in a new relationship.
She met Julian during like her junior high school. So that was like her little junior high school sweetheart. They came out here to Atlanta. My sister was having a better life out here, honestly. I think it was way better. She was really happy.
Eventually, Ashley and Julian had a little boy, Ethan.
She loved her son. Like Ethan was her, like they was literally best friends.
She was very caring, very patient with him. She would play with him no matter what. She was like all-in mom, like her whole world evolved around him. Everybody don't get their mom's attention in that fashion, so I felt like that was dope.
Ashley wanted to give her son a good life, far different from the one she had growing up.
We wasn't raised with our parents. And as we got older, we still teaching ourselves how to be a woman, how to be a wife, how to work, how to just cope with life. And she was doing a hell of a good job.
Ashley got a job as manager at a hardware store in Gwinnett County.
She always had manager positions, as she should. You know, she had the mentality as a boss.
In Beaufort, Ashley was trying to build something for herself and for her son. But now, her life has tragically been cut short, and her son has lost his mother forever. After conducting an autopsy, the medical examiner has ruled Ashley's death a murder, and her attack had been exceptionally brutal.
The autopsy revealed that the adrenal gland was shattered and Ashley bled out due to the attack. For Ashley's adrenal gland to shatter, that definitely means that she received blunt force trauma.
You have to be hit very hard to rupture your adrenal gland. And, you know, and she's very tiny already.
What had been an assault complaint minutes earlier has just taken a serious turn.
Now we have what we in Georgia call a murder, a homicide.
Ashley had told police she was targeted in a case of mistaken identity, but investigators question that when they learn about her injuries.
This doesn't seem like a random attack. This definitely seems personal.
But who would want to attack someone like her?
Investigators wonder the same, and the first person they want to ask is Ashley's boyfriend, Julian Reyes.
The police were definitely intrigued.
He was a significant other at the home, bringing her to the hospital, and so law enforcement immediately turned their sights to Julian Reyes.
On August 11th, 2022, the quiet town of Beaufort, Georgia, was rocked by violence when 30-year-old Ashley Bocanegra was viciously attacked. The assault was so brutal that she later died from internal bleeding, leaving behind her 7-year-old son. Her boyfriend, Julian Reyes, had rushed her to the ER, but now police want to talk to him.
The police begin their investigation, and the first person that they investigate is Ashley's partner, Julian. He's at the hospital waiting on her.
How you doing, sir? First, just want to say I'm really sorry for your loss. We're going to do everything we can to find the people responsible.
Oh, man.
I know this is really difficult right now.
Doesn't even seem real. It's like...
Julian tells investigators Ashley called him at work and told him she'd been attacked.
Did she tell you who did this to her?
She told me 2 females.
She described them?
One was a dark-skinned, heavy-set woman, and then one was a light-skinned woman. That's all she said.
Julian says as he rushed Ashley to the hospital, she continued telling him what happened.
They kicked me in my ribs while the big heavy-set one was on top of her. The other one was kicking her. Why would anybody want to do that? You know, it's like random. She was going out to get me a birthday cake. Today's my birthday. She went out to get me a birthday cake. It just happened, you know, and we have a 7-year-old son. And I have to go to my son.
Julian appears genuinely distraught, and his version of events matches Ashley's account. But police wonder, could the couple have coordinated their stories? Had Ashley been covering for Julian? Did the couple have a history of domestic abuse? When police talk to Ashley's family, they get some answers.
We visited Atlanta a couple of times, and we tried to visit Ashley at Buford, and she was like, oh no, it's not good timing.
They have a few physical fights. That's why my sister was so scared when he would come home and she'll be on the phone with the family member.
While investigators consider that Julian may have had something to do with Ashley's death, they chase down another lead after learning the ER nurse wasn't the only one to call 911 the day Ashley was attacked.
Yes, ma'am. This is 911. I'm returning a call.
Hi, I worked here at an apartment complex, and there was 2 girls fighting, and she's really bloody. I can see the blood from where I'm at.
A security guard at the Preston Hills Apartments called 911 to report that she was witnessing an assault.
And you said one of them is bleeding?
Yeah, I can see her forehead from down here is bleeding. The girl had her on the ground. It's a black girl, and I can't tell if it's 2 white girls or 2 Spanish girls.
Investigators speak to the officers that responded to the 911 call and learn that the woman in the apartment is Antonetta Stevens.
The police visits Antonetta's home for questioning, and Antonetta comes out to the door.
She says she lives there with her fiancé, Daniel Gonzalez, and their 2-year-old son. And it didn't take long for her to admit that she fought with Ashley. When the officers ask why the women fought, Antonetta is quick to tell them. She says Daniel was cheating on her with Ashley.
She explained to the police that it was a mutual fight, that Ashley came to her apartment and picked a fight.
Officers filed a report and went on their way. That is, until Ashley succumbed to her injuries. Police make a second visit to Antonetta's apartment in the early morning hours of August 12th. And they're surprised to see something that could take the investigation in an entirely different direction.
They noticed that Daniel had scratches on his body.
This obviously would raise concerns for law enforcement in terms of his level of engagement in the physical altercation. What was Daniel's Preston Hill apartment complex appeared to be a pretty massive apartment complex, such that individuals could live in the same complex and never see one another, right? And so it appears that the way it is made is not made on flat land, that it is made on a very hilly land, which has allowed the complex to have different buildings. And that allowed the young ladies in this situation to maintain their distance from one another, such that Ms. Stevens never even knew that her partner or significant other had been in a potential.
Gwinnett County Police are investigating the murder of Ashley Bocanegra, who was viciously assaulted outside the Preston Hills apartment complex. A 911 call led police to the home of 27-year-old Antonetta Stevens, who admits she and 17-year-old Janine Gonzalez fought Ashley. Police had no choice but to drop the matter until Ashley succumbed to her injuries.
Now, the investigation pivots to a homicide investigation. They immediately return to the apartment.
This time they have different news. They come back to the apartment, knock on the door. Antonetta comes back to the door with her sister-in-law, Janine.
Hey. I'm Detective Carter with Gwinnett County Police. Are you your internet?
Yes, hi.
Hey, this is Detective Poppy, or Sergeant Poppy.
Hi, nice to meet you.
We know that there was like an incident that happened earlier today. Has anyone called you about it since?
No. Was somebody supposed to?
Well, we just got another call about it. So I guess the girl went to the hospital and she died.
She died?
She's dead. So, but we know that there was like an altercation that happened beforehand.
And that was mutual, and she came here.
Yeah, we understand that.
Yeah.
So, but because of it,
I wasn't going to kill anybody.
Yeah.
I'm not that person.
I get it.
Yeah.
But because of that, we have to kind of talk to you guys and get a more formal statement.
Sure, okay. Wow, I'm so sorry about that. That was not...
Antonetta immediately says that she's sorry. It didn't really sound very empathetic. It just sounded like she just was saying it because she knew that was the right thing to say.
Are you the sister? His sister? Okay.
And Janine really didn't say much. You know, she even had a little smirk behind her.
I've been mentally going through a lot. I came here with my fiance to start a new life, buy a house, everything like that, and I never expected him to basically cheat on me with someone at the workplace. You know what I'm saying?
That's not a justification. That's not an excuse for murder.
We gotta get off right.
Detectives ask both women to come to headquarters to make a formal statement, and they agree. But before investigators leave, they want to speak to Daniel.
You know Ashley?
Yes, sir.
How do you know Ashley?
You know, you got him emotional relationship.
Okay.
Daniel tells detectives that Ashley is his manager at Floor & Decor, where he works.
All right. So they had the altercation earlier this afternoon.
Yes, sir.
Okay, which you don't know anything about.
No, I was informed that while I'm sleeping, she rendered my phone to my phone.
While interviewing Daniel, detectives see something that makes them question if Daniel is telling them the whole story.
It looks as if Daniel has bruises and or scratches on his body. He now could be a suspect.
Daniel tells police that on the day Ashley was murdered, after working the night shift, he went to the gym and then came home to take a nap.
Antonetta uses this opportunity to go through Daniel's phone. What she finds is racy text messages, flirtatious photos, plans between the two to raise their children together, to move out.
Daniel says Antonetta was angry when she saw the texts between him and Ashley. She started texting Ashley from his phone.
Well, she had a patient with me, and she said, hey, so she kicked me out and come meet me. She used basically her emotional, the way she feels towards me.
So she asked her to come over. She was pretending to be you.
Yes, ma'am.
And then what?
Daniel allows investigators to take his phone and download the messages. He goes on to say he only found out about the fight when he was awakened by loud banging on his front door.
After the altercation, Ashley follows Antonetta and Janine back to the apartment because they have her phone. So she's banging on the door, "Give me my phone." They're yelling from inside, "We're not giving you your phone."
Daniel says when he opened the door, he was surprised to see Ashley on the other side.
He's thinking like, "Oh my God, what's going on?" But not only that, Ashley is bloody. She is, beaten. She has bruises, she has bite marks.
Daniel says he tried to wrestle Ashley's phone away from Antonetta.
Antonetta is still upset, so she starts hitting on him, beating him on his back.
Daniel tells police that's how he got the scratches and bruises. But eventually, he got Ashley's phone back.
He hands her her phone. She takes the phone, and then Ashley goes back home. She walks back across the apartment complex to her home.
Daniel says that's the last time he saw Ashley, but that they texted moments later. He shares those with detectives as well.
It turns out that it was those kicks by Janine that turned out to be the fatal blow for Ashley Bocanegra.
As the questioning continues on his doorstep, Daniel grows increasingly worried about Ashley.
So they're questioning him, they're asking him about the bruises, and he's more concerned about Ashley.
Is she hurt?
I feel
Like real bad?
So,
Honestly, I'm not gonna make a show. I'm not gonna go and yell. I'm not gonna go call her. I just want to know.
well, yeah, we got a call from the hospital a little while ago, and she actually passed away.
Bro, stop playing with me.
No.
Please.
seriously.
Please stop playing with me. Please stop playing with me.
Sit down, sit down, sit down, sit down, sit down, sit down, sit down.
He could not believe it. It was devastating.
They would talk every day, all day. They was best friends. Anytime Ashley needed to vent, anytime he needed to vent, they was there for each other. All I know is that he was in love with her, and she was in love with him.
Investigators rule Daniel out as a suspect and turn their attention to Antonetta and Janine, who they have just transported to the police station. But will the women play ball and talk, or will they stonewall?
She knew the severity of what was going on at this time and probably knew that there was a chance that if she said too much that she could get in some type of trouble.
Gwinnett County Police are questioning 27-year-old Antonetta Stevens and 17-year-old Janine Gonzalez in connection with the murder of Ashley Bocanegra. Investigators want to talk to them separately to see if they can get to the truth about what really happened to Ashley. Before detectives can begin, Antonetta has a question of her own.
And is my sister-in-law okay?
I'm sorry, who's your sister-in-law?
Janine.
Janine?
He's still getting caught up on everything.
Yeah, like I said, I'm
because,
just
you
playing
know,
catch
her
up.
mom's not here, and, I don't really...
Yeah, she's okay. She's over there.
Okay.
She's fine.
She's a minor.
She's over there. She's over there listening to music.
Okay.
The detectives read Antonetta her Miranda rights.
Have these rights in mind? Do you wish to talk to us now?
Well, I do want to speak with the lawyer just because of how sensitive the situation is.
Despite asking for a lawyer, Antonetta keeps talking.
I will say that, I don't go out looking to harm anybody. That's not my intention. I do feel, very remorseful about anything that has happened with that young lady. I'll also say that, it wasn't my intention to even get into an altercation with her today. She came over to my place of residence looking for my fiance. We argued. I was hit. We fought. I feel really bad, but, I don't know. It's just too much.
She was aware of what could potentially happen to her because Ashley passed away. She said she was remorseful. She just seemed like she was scared that she was gonna go to jail for murder.
You okay?
No, I'm not. I'm just, I have kids. I don't know how to feel, man. I've been going through too much.
Okay, so you want to talk to a lawyer, so what we're going to do is we stop at that point. We don't talk. All right? So we're going to head out of here, but we just need you to wait in here, okay?
Okay, so you wanted to talk to your mom? Okay, so I just want to let you know you're going to be charged with the fight. It's going to be ag battery. Okay? We do have to take your phone for evidence. Okay. But I do want you to have your phone call.
So am I going to jail?
Yeah.
Next, police turn their attention to Janine.
Detective Carter. This is Detective Araya. He's still trying to get filled in on everything. Okay. He's a lead detective, so he's gonna do most of the talking. But I'm just in here because I'm kind of familiar with it. But I'm here too, so.
Detectives read Janine her rights, and unlike Antonetta, she doesn't hold back.
Where do you go to school at?
Buffalo.
Buffalo?
Mhm.
Oh, in college?
I'm a senior.
Senior in high school? Okay. You're just visiting?
Yeah.
Janine says it had been a rocky summer staying with Daniel and Antonetta because the couple was having relationship troubles and arguing every day.
So, my brother, him being a man, cheats. Like always, he's feeling less than, he thinks it's okay to cheat, so, he tells me. So, he tells me who is he cheating with and stuff.
Janine says she had to tell Antonetta.
My sister-in-law, we're very close, like, so close, like, you understand. Like, she's more of a sister to me than my brother's a brother to me, you know?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, like, we're very close.
Yeah.
So, once he told me, I was just like, ooh, I just tell her.
It's girl code.
Yes, right? So...
Janine says when she told Antonetta about Daniel's other woman, she was furious. Then, by chance, she and Antonetta saw Daniel and Ashley together the night before Ashley died.
As we're walking a Quick Trip, both of them are walking together from Quick Trip. So they're just now leaving, and we're just now coming. So Antonetta is like, is that Daniel walking? So now she runs to him like, who is this?
Antonetta immediately goes to them and confronts what's going on. They have, a verbal exchange. Meanwhile, Daniel is saying, this is my boss. There's nothing going on. You're tripping. You're overreacting.
She and Antonetta left without incident. But on the way home, Janine confirmed that was Ashley Bocanegra, Daniel's other woman.
So that starts the whole domino.
Janine's interview with investigators was a stark contrast from Antonetta's.
Antonetta Stevens was very guarded, was emotionless. Janine was very talkative. She was free-flowing with information when asked. Although there were times where she was dishonest and held back, she offered a lot more information than Antonetta Stevens.
But while she appears to be cooperating, investigators find her demeanor troubling.
She smiled, she laughed, she put her feet in the chair.
She was messing with her hair, she was even yawning. She was very immature about the situation.
And then Janine slips up.
Did you guys text her?
What do you mean?
Did you guys send messages to her?
No, we don't got her number.
No, I mean from his phone.
Oh, from his phone?
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't think so, no.
Okay.
You sure?
Yeah.
Because you messed up your story a little bit. I already read the messages. You messed up a little bit.
What was the messages?
He wasn't getting kicked out.
Yes, he was. I don't know. What the hell?
She had no idea the ramifications of her actions or the consequences that were about to come.
Gwinnett County Police are questioning 17-year-old Janine Gonzalez about the attack on Ashley Bocanegra, which she participated in. While Janine appears to be cooperating, investigators are a bit troubled by her demeanor.
Janine's investigative interview was off-putting. It was concerning for law enforcement. She was very disconnected from the reality that a murder had just been committed.
And they know she isn't telling them the whole story. Janine tells police that after the run-in with Daniel and Ashley, Antonetta decided to kick Daniel out, and she put her plan in motion the very next morning.
She don't want to live with him no more. It's either he gonna leave or she's gonna leave. And you know, she gotta leave with the kids and everything. So it makes sense if he just left.
Janine says that's when Daniel texted Ashley.
And then, I guess she was coming to see him. He was getting kicked out. Antonetta saw the messages. So, she decided, like, yeah, now she's about to come see you. Now I'm about to beat her up. Because
What Janine doesn't know, Daniel has already told the detectives a different version of events.
Because you messed up your story a little bit. I already read the messages. You messed up a little bit.
What was the messages?
He wasn't getting kicked out.
Yes, he was.
Caught in a lie, Janine changes up her story.
I only saw the messages where he was cheating. So I'm not sure if anybody texted her.
You sure?
You know? Yeah.
So Antoinette just sent the message
I am
herself?
positive myself. I'm positive. But yeah, I don't know if there's any messages sent to that lady. Cause I can't say I didn't know if there's messages sent. But
You were with her when she was still texting
she
him.
have come.
You were still with her when she was texting her. I know you guys were sending messages.
Janine caves. She says Antonetta sent the messages from Daniel's phone. With that admission, investigators shift their questioning to the fight.
Fighting.
Who was fighting?
The girl and Antonetta.
Everybody?
No.
Girl, you ain't get nothing?
No. Yeah.
Of course you did. I know you did.
Just a little bit.
You got that picture?
Janine tries to downplay her involvement.
I didn't go crazy though, cause she's small as hell. Like, you're enough already. I don't need to be punching her, dragging her. I don't need to do all of that. I'm good.
Yeah.
I give my little hit in, and then that's it. She got on the floor, and I kind of like dragged her just a little bit.
But detectives suspect Janine played a much larger role.
So you clearing your charges?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. It's robbery.
Robbery? What? Robbery?
Yeah.
We didn't steal her phone. We took it so she could come to the house.
Oh, you took it.
Yeah,
You didn't steal it.
she got her phone back. I told you she wasn't leaving unless we gave her back her phone. We just did it so we could call her husband before we changed our mind.
Okay.
We had fun today. She got her phone back.
She said it was okay for you to take it?
No.
Okay, yeah, that's a robbery. The other charge is murder.
Murder?
Yep. You're being charged with murder.
Me?
Yep.
That's too bad.
That's deep, right?
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah.
No. What? Murder?
She was like, me? And so that's when she kind of realized it was serious, but she still didn't take it, like, serious.
Was she following me?
Police tell Janine They need to keep her phone because it's evidence.
They had no idea the bombshell they were about to find on her phone. One that would change everything.
Detectives find a long video shot earlier that day, almost 15 minutes in length. In the video, detectives see Antonetta texting Ashley from Daniel's phone.
Antonetta is asking Janine, should I send it this way? Should I say this? Should I say that? Although Janine is not sending the text messages, she is assisting and curating what the messages would say. Janine is holding the camera, filming everything that is happening.
A crucial role when it came to explaining how Ashley even got there. Ashley was led to believe she was there to help her friend Daniel, but Ashley was set up.
As detectives keep viewing, they see something else, something almost too hard to watch.
This was not a mutual combat situation. This was an old-fashioned ambush.
You want some of this, Janine? Yeah, I do.
I believe that Antonetta Stevens did the absolute right thing when she asked for a lawyer. Most Black and brown people are unaware of how the judicial system works and the importance of having counsel to guide you through the process. And so it is extremely important that whenever interacting with law enforcement, that you have legal counsel available to you, whether or not you can afford one or whether one needs to be appointed to you. Your freedom is at risk. At all times. If law enforcement is talking to you, they're not talking to you because they want to be your friend. They're talking to you because they believe that you have information that may be helpful to something that they're investigating. And so you just need to make sure that you're prepared.
Gwinnett County Police have charged Antonetta Stevens and Janine Gonzalez with the murder of Ashley Bocanegra. Both women have been arrested and taken into custody. But it's only after police take Janine's phone that they discover a bombshell. Janine filmed the entire attack, as well as Antonetta texting Ashley from Daniel's phone.
In the text messages, Antonetta told Ashley where to meet her. Meet me by the trash can. And so as Ashley is approaching, Janine is filming.
Antonetta, she just had a jealous rage. She seemed red because this woman is taking her man away from her family.
Ashley tries to fight back, but Antonetta overpowers her. Then things take an even more dangerous turn.
During the entire ordeal, it seems like Janine was a supporting character. And it's not until in the middle of the fight that Antonetta asked Janine, do you want some of this?
You want some of this, Janine? Yeah, I do.
She goes in and kicks at minimum 2 times.
What detectives have seen on Janine's phone leaves no question that she and Antonetta ambushed Ashley in a violent assault.
Babe, don't do this again, because you're gonna have to make me fight another.
The best evidence that you can have is film. That speaks volumes. There's no need to try to explain exactly what you see. You just see it. You could hear her say things that cut out all type of defenses.
I will murder you. I will murder you.
What most people don't understand is that premeditation and malice can be created in a split second.
When the case is presented before a grand jury 2 days later, the charges against the women increase.
Both Antoinette and Janine were charged with a 5-count indictment. That was consisting of malice murder, 2 counts of felony murder, 1 count of aggravated battery, and 1 count of robbery by force.
Both women were looking at life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Since Janine is so young, her family is desperate to get her charges reduced, arguing she didn't mean to kill Ashley and she didn't play a significant role in her assault.
Unfortunately, the text that Ashley sent to Daniel proved differently. She told Daniel that if it wasn't for his sister kicking her, she would have been fine.
Janine's attorney was unsuccessful in getting the charges against her reduced, but the defense thinks it still has something working in its favor.
Antoinette said, "I did not intend for her to die." That in and of itself can negate the element of malice and a forethought.
As a result, both Antonetta and Janine are offered a plea deal.
The defense and the prosecutor agreed for a plea of a reduced charge from murder to voluntary manslaughter.
Ashley's family was outraged about the offer.
How is that not murder? They said all we did was have a fight. She was able to walk away on her own. We were trying to kill her. She wouldn't have been able to walk away on her own. We would have killed her right then and there.
That claim quickly fell apart after the prosecution gained access to another video. This one from Ashley's door camera, captured moments after the fight.
Ashley, surprisingly, is able to make it back to her apartment after the fight.
Moments later, after changing her clothes, Ashley appears outside again.
Ashley is suffering. She's suffering from things that she's not even aware of.
In the end, Antonetta and Janine accept the plea deal for voluntary manslaughter. Both women are sentenced to 20 years in prison. Additionally, they are charged with robbery by force, which carries another 20 years to be served concurrently. Both are eligible for release no earlier than August 2042. While Ashley's family doesn't doubt Daniel's love for her, they hold him partly responsible for her death.
He was living two lives, basically, and behind him not being honest, he ruined the life of, like, a lot of people. The person he loved is now not here. The mother of his kids is now doing 20 years. His little sister's now doing 20 years. Was it worth it?
I don't think there's no healing. Ashley could never come back. I will never have my sister again.
Ashley's partner, Julian, who was cleared early on as a suspect in her death, is raising their 10-year-old son.
I think it's the heinousness of the crime, almost tribal, and it's based upon one woman.
Antonetta did what she did.
The dynamic shifts within the arena of American jurisprudence are rarely as violent or as deeply unsettling as the tectonic explosion that rocked the Massachusetts legal system in the summer of 2026. For 22 years, the city of Boston carried a scar, a dark, agonizing question mark left behind in the freezing, snow-covered winter of 2004 when 28-year-old brilliant medical researcher Clara Vance was found brutally murdered inside her brownstone apartment in the historic South End. Her death was an exercise in pure savagery, a crime that defied the peaceful, upscale nature of her neighborhood and paralyzed the city with fear. Yet, as terrifying as the murder scene was, the true mystery that consumed the public, baffled the police, and ultimately froze the investigation into a permanent cold case was the simultaneous, total evaporation of her husband, Dr. Richard Vance. He did not run away in a conventional manner. His car remained parked in the driveway, his wallet, keys, and passport were left untouched on the kitchen counter, and his bank accounts remained entirely undisturbed. It was as if the same shadow that had claimed Clara's life had reached out and dragged Richard into the ether, leaving behind a double tragedy that shattered two families and left a community drowning in paranoia. For over 2 decades, the narrative remained static, a textbook example of a double mystery where the primary suspect was presumed dead, perhaps thrown into the icy depths of the Charles River by a nameless, faceless monster. But the past is a volatile substance, and under the crushing weight of modern investigative methodology, the long-accepted illusion did not just fracture, it disintegrated entirely, revealing a twisted web of calculated malice, corporate espionage, and a chilling reinvented life that lived right next door to justice. The psychological devastation that gripped Boston on that bitter morning of December 12, 2004, established a baseline of collective trauma that would persist for generations. Clara Vance was a rising star in the competitive world of pharmaceutical innovation, a woman whose groundbreaking work in cellular synthesis promised to revolutionize targeted oncology treatments. Her husband, Richard, was an equally accomplished thoracic surgeon at one of the city's prestigious teaching hospitals, forming a professional and personal partnership that local newspapers frequently profiled as the ideal of modern achievement. They were young, wealthy, deeply integrated into the cultural fabric of Boston, and seemingly insulated from the darker currents of urban survival. When a colleague, alarmed by Clara's unprecedented absence from a critical research symposium, requested a wellness check, the responding patrol officers expected to find a minor medical emergency or a temporary miscommunication. Instead, the moment they crossed the threshold of the South End brownstone, they walked directly into a chamber of horrors. The interior was a battlefield of broken glass, overturned antique furniture, and walls sprayed with high-velocity blood spatter, painting a vivid picture of a desperate, terrifying struggle for survival. Clara lay near the hearth of the living room, her life extinguished by multiple blunt force injuries to the head and defensive wounds that lacerated her hands, indicating she had fought her attacker with every ounce of her remaining strength. The immediate operational response by the Boston Police Department was rapid, aggressive, and fundamentally flawed by an initial assumption that guided every tactical decision made during the golden hours of the investigation. Detectives looking at the sheer chaos of the crime scene and the absolute disappearance of the husband immediately launched a massive dragnet designed to locate Richard Vance, operating under the dual hypothesis that he was either the perpetrator fleeing the scene or a secondary victim who had been forcibly abducted by the killer. Search teams with tracking dogs fanned out across the snow-slicked alleys of the South End, while Marine units deployed sonar grids into the freezing currents of the Charles River, working against the clock as a ferocious winter blizzard threatened to bury any remaining physical evidence under feet of ice. The media coverage was instantaneous and on DAP, with television networks interrupting regular broadcasts to flash Richard's photograph across the screen, pleading with the public for any sighting of the missing surgeon. But the city remained stubbornly silent. No witnesses emerged who had seen anyone leaving the brownstone during the critical timeline. No security cameras, primitive and sparse in 2004, captured a fleeing figure, and the forensic sweeps of the house yielded a frustratingly clean biological canvas, devoid of foreign fingerprints or external DNA markers. As the weeks bled into months, the investigation ground to a suffocating, political standstill against a wall of dead ends that turned the Vance case into a permanent, agonizing fixture of local true crime lore. The absolute absence of a body for Richard Vance created a legal and investigative purgatory that paralyzed the prosecutor's office. They could not indict a ghost, nor could they definitively rule out the possibility that the missing husband was lying in an unmarked grave, the victim of a targeted home invasion. Clara's family was left to navigate a double landscape of grief, mourning a daughter whose life had been violently stolen while simultaneously tormented by the unresolved fate of a son-in-law they had loved as their own. The brownstone in the South End was eventually boarded up, its historic brick facade gathering grime, a physical monument to a night of absolute violence that society seemed incapable of explaining. The files were eventually bound in heavy cardboard boxes, marked with the cold case designation, and transferred to the subterranean archives of the police headquarters, where they gathered dust while the world outside marched into the digital age. The catalyst that would ultimately break this 22-year stasis did not originate from a sudden pang of conscience or an anonymous tip from the underworld, but from the quiet, relentless evolution of digital identity tracking, and the modernization of cold case protocols in 2026. A newly formed federal task force, utilizing advanced biometric cross-matching algorithms designed to scan historical missing persons databases against modern corporate licensing registries, flag-marked a subtle, mathematical anomaly half a continent away in the sun-drenched suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona. A man living under the name of Dr. Arthur Sterling, a highly successful medical consultant specializing in private research validation, had applied for a routine international travel credential. Under the Advanced Security Protocols of 2026, the application required a high-resolution, multispectral biometric scan of the iris and facial bone structure, a technology that bypasses superficial modifications like plastic surgery, aging, or hair transplantation. When the automated system processed Sterling's biometric signature, the digital network did not return a verification of his Arizona identity. Instead, it triggered a silent, high-priority alert that pinged directly into the Homicide Division of the Boston Police Department. The facial geometry, the deep tissue alignment of the orbital rims, and the specific vascular patterns of the retina were an absolute, 1 in a billion match to Dr. Richard Vance, the missing husband who had supposedly evaporated into the Boston blizzard 22 years prior. The revelation that a primary figure in a historic homicide was alive, thriving, and operating under an entirely fabricated persona within the upper echelons of the medical community sparked a covert, high-stakes operational deployment that required absolute tactical precision. A specialized team of federal marshals and veteran Boston cold case detectives caught the next flight to Phoenix, operating under a strict mandate of total information security to prevent the suspect from realizing the net was closing in. They began a deep dive, retrospective surveillance operation on the man known as Arthur Sterling, mapping his daily routines, his financial transactions, and his professional networks. What they uncovered was a masterclass in identity theft and psychological compartmentalization. Sterling had appeared in Arizona in early 2005, mere months after the Boston murder, armed with an unassailable set of identification documents, including a social security number, a birth certificate, and medical credentials that belonged to a real, young doctor named Arthur Sterling who had died in a remote hiking accident in the Pacific Northwest in late 2003, a death that had gone largely unnoticed by major federal registries at the time. The forensic construction of how Richard Vance transformed into Arthur Sterling revealed a level of cold, calculating premeditation that completely inverted the historical narrative of the crime. This was not a man who had fled in a panic following a spontaneous domestic dispute. This was a ghost who had systematically built his escape hatch long before the first drop of blood was spilled in the South End brownstone. Digital archaeologists tracing the financial undercurrents of the Vance household discovered that in the 18 months leading up to the murder, small, untraceable increments of cash had been siphoned from private investment portfolios, converted into physical gold bullion, and moved to secure private vaults in Nevada under corporate shell names. Vance had utilized his medical status to quietly access specialized chemical alterants and cosmetic procedural equipment, subtly altering his own physical appearance over time so that when the moment came to step into the skin of a dead man, the transition would be seamless to the casual observer. He had systematically deleted his past, abandoned his family, and stood by while his wife's memory was dissected by the public, all to ensure his own absolute survival in a new world of his own design. The tactical arrest of Dr. Arthur Sterling was executed with surgical efficiency outside a luxury medical plaza in Scottsdale, Arizona, on a morning when the desert heat was a stark contrast to the freezing snow of his past life. As he walked toward his vehicle, flanked by a security detail he had hired to protect his status, for unmarked tactical units cut off his exit, and federal agents moved in with weapons drawn. When the lead Boston detective stepped forward, looked the elderly consultant in the eyes, and uttered the words, "Richard Vance, you are under arrest for the murder of Clara Vance," there was no theatrical denial, no explosive resistance, and no panic. Instead, witnesses reported a chilling, sudden deflation in the man's posture, a momentary tightening of the jaw, followed by a low, gravelly response that sent a shiver down the spines of the arresting officers. "It took you longer than I expected." The mask of Arthur Sterling had cracked, exposing the cold, unyielding core of a fugitive who had spent 22 years looking over his shoulder, waiting for the technology of the future to finally catch up with the sins of his past. The return of Richard Vance to Boston under heavy federal escort was a media circus that dominated national headlines, reframing the 2004 cold case from a tragic mystery into a Chandong public spectacle of betrayal. The headline ran across every major digital portal. Boston 2004 cold case solved. Victims missing. Husband found living under a new identity. The public struggled to comprehend the sheer scale of the deception. People who had worked with Arthur Sterling in Arizona, clients who had trusted his medical advice, and neighbors who had shared fences with him were suddenly forced to confront the reality that their refined, intellectual friend was an accused killer who had lived a lie for over 2 decades. Inside the high-security interrogation rooms at the Suffolk County House of Correction, the dynamic between Vance and the prosecution team became a psychological chess match, with the defendant refusing to speak without the presence of an elite team of defense attorneys he had retained using his vast, hidden Arizona assets. The true motive behind the savage eradication of Clara Vance began to crystallize as forensic accountants and corporate investigators tore through the digital infrastructure of the medical research firm where Clara had been employed in 2004. The narrative of a simple domestic dispute was completely obliterated by the discovery of a massive, multi-million-dollar corporate espionage plot that reached into the highest levels of the international pharmaceutical market. Investigators uncovered hidden communication logs between Richard Vance and a rival European biotech conglomerate, showing that the surgeon had been attempting to secretly sell his wife's proprietary cellular synthesis research, a technological breakthrough worth hundreds of millions of dollars in future patent rights. Clara had discovered the betrayal mere days before her murder, tracking the unauthorized downloads of her data back to Richard's personal laptop. She had confronted him, threatening to expose his medical malpractice and corporate theft to the federal authorities, an action that would have destroyed his career, stripped him of his freedom, and invalidated his standing in society. The confrontation that occurred on that freezing December night was reconstructed with terrifying clarity through a secondary, advanced analysis of the original bloodstain patterns using 2026 fluid dynamics modeling software. The technology allowed investigators to simulate the exact physical movements of both the attacker and the victim within the spatial dimensions of the brownstone. The data proved that Richard Vance had not reacted in a moment of temporary insanity. He had ambushed Clara from behind as she sat at her desk preparing the documentation to expose him. When the initial strike failed to render her unconscious, a desperate, protracted battle ensued through the living room, with Vance utilizing a heavy bronze statuette from the mantelpiece to repeatedly crush his wife's skull until the threat of his exposure was permanently silenced. The sheer violence of the act was a direct reflection of his absolute determination to preserve his own freedom and profit from the stolen research, a calculated liquidation of a human life for corporate gain. The meticulous nature of the subsequent cleanup and staging operation highlighted the sociopathic coldness of the killer's mind. After ensuring Clara was dead, Vance spent hours manipulating the physical environment to mimic a chaotic home invasion or an abduction scenario. He systematically destroyed his own clothing, utilized advanced medical detergents to scrub his own biological traces from the immediate vicinity of the body, and staged the kitchen counter with his own personal items to create the immediate illusion that he had been snatched from the home alongside the killer. He then walked out of the house into the height of the 2004 blizzard, a storm that he knew would obliterate his footprints and paralyze the initial police response, allowing him to board a prearranged, private transport that moved him out of the state before the crime scene was even discovered. He had used the weather as an accomplice, transforming a brutal homicide into a natural vanishing act that kept the police hunting for his corpse while he was already signing the lease on his new life in the desert. The legal proceedings against Richard Vance in the fall of 2026 became an unprecedented test of the American judicial system's ability to prosecute a crime across a 22-year chasm of time. The defense mounted a ferocious attack on the preservation of the original physical evidence, arguing that the chain of custody had been compromised over the decades and that the modern biometric data used to identify Vance was an unconstitutional violation of his privacy rights under the Fourth Amendment. But the prosecution's case was an airtight fortress of modern science and historic documentation. The introduction of the 2026 biometric data, combined with the recovery of the original bronze statuette, which still retained microscopic traces of Clara's tissue beneath a layer of old polish, left the defense with no viable narrative of innocence. The courtroom was packed to capacity every single day, with medical students, legal scholars, and citizens standing in line for hours just to catch a glimpse of the fallen surgeon who had outrun the law for a generation only to be brought down by a digital scan. The emotional climax of the trial came when Clara's aging mother, who had spent 22 years praying for both her daughter's justice and her son-in-law's safety, took the stand to face the monster who had authored her lifetime of agony. Looking directly at Richard Vance, whose physical appearance had been restored to his true identity through the removal of his cosmetic alterations by court order, she delivered a victim impact statement that reduced the entire courtroom to a profound, breathless silence. She spoke of the empty chairs at every Thanksgiving table, the torturous nights spent wondering if Richard was suffering in some hidden location, and the sickening horror of realizing that the man she had embraced as a son was the architect of her family's total destruction. Vance sat in the dock, his face remaining an impenetrable mask of clinical detachment, a chilling reminder that the capacity for empathy had long been excised from his psychological makeup, replaced by a permanent, survival-driven narcissism. The jury's verdict was a swift, crushing hammer blow that brought a definitive end to the 22-year illusion of Arthur Sterling. After less than 3 hours of deliberation, Richard Vance was found guilty on all counts of first-degree murder, corporate espionage, and identity theft. The judge, in handing down a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, did not mince words, describing Vance as a predator of unparalleled intellect and cowardice, a man who traded the sanctity of human life and the trust of his profession for the cheap currency of a stolen existence. The sentence ensured that the former surgeon would spend his remaining days within the stark, concrete confines of a maximum security state penitentiary, his world reduced to a single cell, a fitting contrast to the vast desert freedom he had enjoyed under his false identity. The legacy of the 2004 Boston cold case resolution remains an indelible turning point in the annals of modern criminal justice, a definitive proof that in the digital era, there is no such thing as a permanent escape. The South End brownstone has since been purchased by a nonprofit research collective, transformed into a state-of-the-art laboratory dedicated to empowering women in the STEM fields, a living monument to Clara Vance's cut-short genius that ensures her true work will continue to save lives long after her killer's name has faded into obscurity. For the city of Boston, the closure of this case brought a profound, collective sigh of relief, cleansing the neighborhood of a ghost that had haunted its streets for a generation. The case stands as a permanent, echoing warning to those who believe they can outrun their past. No matter how deep you dig the grave, no matter how perfectly you craft the disguise, and no matter how many decades are allowed to pass, the light of justice is a patient, unyielding force that will always find a way to tear through the concrete, expose the monster, and demand a final, absolute accounting. The mechanical precision with which Dr. Richard Vance dismantled his old life in Boston and constructed the pristine, unassailable facade of Dr. Arthur Sterling in the deserts of Arizona stands as a terrifying testament to the capacity of the human mind for absolute, cold-blooded compartmentalization. To understand the sheer scale of this identity mutation, one must step out of the courtroom of 2026 and return to the immediate, chaotic aftermath of the 2004 blizzard that swallowed the physical evidence of Clara Vance's slaughter. While the Boston Police Department's homicide unit was frantically analyzing the bloody, disrupted layout of the South End brownstone, operating under the tragic assumption that they were dealing with either a double homicide or a high-stakes abduction, the man they were looking for was already executing the second phase of a survival protocol that had been drafted months in advance. The blizzard was not just a natural disaster that hampered the initial canine search units. It was the perfect, atmospheric eraser that Richard Vance used to sever his connection to reality, transforming himself from a prominent New England thoracic surgeon into a nameless drifter moving swiftly southward into the anonymous heart of the American continent. The logistics of his escape route reveal a level of calculating foresight that completely shatters the traditional profile of a crime of passion. In 2004, the national security infrastructure was heavily focused on external threats, leaving significant, localized gaps in interstate transit monitoring and digital biometric tracking. Vance did not commit the rookie error of booking a commercial flight, purchasing a train ticket, or using an active credit card that would instantly ping the financial fraud networks. Instead, he utilized a network of private, cash-only regional courier services and long-distance trucking routes that he had mapped out during his frequent travels to medical conferences across the country. Hidden beneath layers of oversized winter clothing, his face obscured by industrial ski goggles and a heavy scarf, he moved seamlessly through the whiteout conditions of the Massachusetts Turnpike, a ghost carrying a waterproof duffel bag containing hundreds of thousands of dollars in physical gold bullion, stacked rows of sequential $100 bills, and a pristine folder of stolen identity documents that had belonged to the late Dr. Arthur Sterling. The acquisition of Arthur Sterling's identity was perhaps the most sinister component of the entire operation, illustrating that Vance's predatory instincts were not confined to the night of the murder. The real Arthur Sterling had been a brilliant but reclusive research scientist who had suffered a fatal fall during a solitary backpacking expedition in the rugged terrain of the Cascade Mountains in late 2003. Because Sterling had no surviving immediate family and had lived an isolated, off-grid lifestyle between research contracts, his death had remained unregistered in major federal databases for over a year, a bureaucratic oversight that Richard Vance discovered while browsing through obscure, deep web medical mortality registries and legacy public records. Vance did not merely steal a social security number. He systematically studied Sterling's academic transcripts, his research papers, his handwriting style, and his personal history, memorizing the minutiae of a dead man's existence until he could recite it under the intense pressure of a professional interview or a state licensing board examination. When he finally arrived in the Southwest, he did not look like a fugitive on the run. He arrived as a highly qualified, independently wealthy medical consultant seeking a quiet, private practice away from the frantic pace of the East Coast. The psychological landscape of Phoenix, Arizona, in the mid-2000s provided the perfect, sun-bleached sanctuary for a reinvention of this magnitude. It was a sprawling, rapidly expanding metropolis characterized by a high volume of transient professionals, transient wealth, and a structural anonymity that made it incredibly easy for a man with cash and credentials to disappear into the modern architectural sprawl. Operating under his new legal identity, Vance established a boutique medical consulting firm specializing in clinical trial validation and private pharmaceutical investment analysis, a highly lucrative niche that allowed him to operate behind the scenes of major medical corporations without ever having to perform surgery or place his hands on a patient in a public hospital where his distinctive surgical techniques might be recognized by former colleagues. He bought a luxury estate in a gated community in Paradise Valley, surrounded by high stucco walls and mature desert landscaping, creating a physical fortress that mirrored the psychological walls he had built around his consciousness. To the elite social circles of Phoenix, Dr. Arthur Sterling quickly became known as a refined, slightly eccentric intellectual, a man of immense charm and vast medical knowledge who was intensely private about his past. He was the man who contributed generously to local art galleries, who maintained an immaculate collection of vintage European sports cars, and who was always available to provide brilliant, off-the-record advice to biotech startups seeking venture capital. He did not avoid the public eye entirely. Rather, he managed it with a sophisticated press strategy that ensured his name appeared only in high-end business journals and philanthropic registries, completely divorced from any context that could link him back to the unresolved tragedy in Massachusetts. He had effectively created a flawless, parallel universe where the name Clara Vance did not exist, where the blood-splattered brownstone was nothing more than a forgotten nightmare, and where he was the celebrated architect of his own magnificent, fraudulent destiny. Meanwhile, back in Boston, the cold case unit was drowning in a sea of toxic ambiguity that poisoned the investigation for over 2 decades. The case file had become a symbol of systemic frustration within the department, a mystery that was passed down through 3 generations of homicide detectives like a cursed inheritance. The initial failure to locate Richard Vance's body had led to a split in the investigative trajectory that paralyzed any definitive legal action. One faction of detectives remained utterly convinced that Vance was a ruthless killer who had successfully outsmarted the system, while another group, influenced by the complete lack of secondary financial activity or domestic sightings, believed with equal fervor that the surgeon had been targeted by the same unknown entity that had executed Clara, his body dumped in some inaccessible location that the winter storm had permanently hidden from human eyes. This internal division created a profound, bureaucratic inertia. Without a body or a definitive trail of flight, the district attorney's office refused to issue a formal murder indictment, leaving the file in a state of permanent, agonizing suspension. The emotional toll of this investigative stasis on Clara's surviving relatives was an ongoing, slow-motion tragedy that played out in the quiet suburbs of Boston. Her father suffered a fatal stroke in 2012, his final hours consumed by the bitter, unfulfilled longing for answers, while her mother, Eleanor Vance Miller, became a fixture at annual police press conferences, her face etched with the deep, unmistakable lines of a grief that time was entirely powerless to soothe. Every December, as the anniversary of the murder approached and the Boston skies turned the same heavy, leaden gray that they had been in 2004, Eleanor would stand before the television cameras, holding up the faded photographs of her brilliant daughter and her missing son-in-law, begging anyone with information to step forward. She did not know that 3,000 miles away, sitting in a climate-controlled study overlooking a sparkling azure swimming pool, the man who had shattered her family was watching those same broadcasts on a high-definition digital screen, his face remaining an unblinking, clinical mask of absolute detachment as he adjusted the gold watch on his wrist and poured himself another glass of vintage wine. The structural breakdown that would ultimately shatter this decades-long illusion began in the early 2020s, with the quiet introduction of the National Biometric Security Initiative, a sweeping, federal modernization program designed to integrate separate state licensing systems, corporate registries, and historic law enforcement databases into a single, centralized digital identity framework. The goal is to eliminate identity theft and financial fraud by requiring a uniform standard of high-resolution biometric verification for any individual holding a position of public trust, including corporate executives, financial advisors, and medical professionals. For nearly 20 years, Richard Vance had successfully bypassed early biometric systems by utilizing legacy paper documentation, pristine fraudulent credentials, and avoiding any direct contact with law enforcement or federal immigration checkpoints. He had managed his identity like an elite corporate asset, ensuring that every tax return, every property deed, and every corporate filing under the name of Arthur Sterling was mathematically flawless. But the technology of 2026 was not a system that could be outsmarted by a clean paper trail or a sophisticated corporate facade. The modern multispectral biometric scanners deployed by federal agencies did not merely look at a photograph or a superficial fingerprint. They utilized advanced infrared light arrays to map the deep tissue topography of the human face, recording the unique structural alignment of the orbital bones, the precise thickness of the cranial shelf, and the microscopic vascular networks of the retina. Physical signatures that are determined by genetics and remain entirely unalterable by plastic, surgery, hormonal shifts, or the natural process of aging. When Richard Vance walked into a federal suboffice in Phoenix to renew his international corporate consulting credentials, believing that his 22 years of unblemished survival rendered him completely invisible, he was stepping into a digital trap that had been decades in the making. The moment he placed his face against the scanner's optical interface, the machine did not read the identity of Arthur Sterling. It read the permanent, biological code of Richard Vance, a code that had been flagged with an international Red Notice homicide warrant since the winter of 2004. The digital alert did not trigger an immediate, theatrical alarm in the Phoenix office. The federal security network was designed to operate with a silent, devastating discretion to prevent high-priority targets from fleeing the immediate perimeter. The terminal screen in front of the local clerk displayed a routine, simulated processing delay, while behind the scenes, a high-priority data packet was routed directly to the major case unit at Scotland Yard and the cold case squad of the Boston Police Department. Within 90 seconds, a group of veteran detectives who had spent their careers looking at the yellowed photographs of the 2004 crime scene were staring at a crisp, high-resolution digital image of an elderly, elegant man in Arizona, his facial geometry matching the missing surgeon with a mathematical certainty of 99.98%. The shock in the Boston briefing room was absolute. A file that had been treated as a historic ghost story for nearly a quarter of a century had suddenly transformed into an active, high-velocity fugitive hunt that required an immediate, tactical deployment of federal assets across state lines. The covert surveillance operation launched by the Joint Task Force in the subsequent 72 hours was an exercise in extreme professional caution. Detectives knew that a man who had successfully maintained an identity mutation for 22 years possessed an extraordinary level of psychological resilience and operational intelligence. If he detected the slightest shift in his environment, if he noticed an unfamiliar vehicle parked outside his gated estate, or if he caught an unusual pattern in his digital communications, he could instantly execute a secondary escape protocol, utilizing his hidden offshore assets to vanish across the southern border into Mexico or board a private transport to a non-extradition territory. The task force deployed specialized, long-range optical surveillance vans disguised as local utility vehicles, while cyberforensics teams established a continuous, real-time mirror of his encrypted digital network, monitoring his financial transactions, his email logs, and his corporate communications for any sign that he was preparing to liquidate his Arizona holdings. What the surveillance team observed was a man who was completely enveloped in his own illusion of safety. Vance followed a meticulous, aristocratic routine. He spent his mornings reading international medical journals on his terrace, his afternoons conducting high-level video consultations with biotech executives, and his evenings dining at the most exclusive restaurants in Scottsdale, surrounded by a social circle that viewed him as a pillar of intellectual achievement. The contrast between this pristine, luxury existence and the brutal reality of the blood-drenched brownstone in Boston was an active, psychological insult to the detectives who were watching him through long-range lenses. They were looking at a monster who had stolen 22 years of life, safety, and prestige from the system. A man who had crushed his wife's skull for profit and then used the identity of a dead scientist to buy himself a paradise in the desert. The determination to execute an absolute, unappealable arrest became the driving force for every agent on the team, setting the stage for a tactical confrontation that would finally bring the 2004 cold case roaring back into the living memory of the nation. The operational planning for the takedown outside the Scottsdale Medical Plaza was designed to eliminate any possibility of a violent escalation or a public disruption. Investigators knew that Vance traveled with a private security driver, a standard luxury precaution for high-net-worth consultants in the area, and that any attempt to breach his estate could result in a barricade situation that would draw the attention of the national media before the suspect could be legally secured. The decision was made to intercept him in an open, high-visibility environment where his security detail would be caught entirely off guard and where the physical geography favored a rapid, multi-directional containment strategy. At exactly 10:14 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, as the desert sun began to bake the asphalt of the plaza, Vance stepped out of the glass doors of the medical complex, dressed in a tailored linen suit, a leather briefcase in his right hand, his demeanor light and confident as he gestured to his driver to bring the vehicle around. The execution of the arrest was so swift that it appeared to onlookers like a sequence from a choreographed cinematic production. 4 unmarked, heavy-duty tactical SUVs surged forward from different corners of the parking structure, their engines roaring as they completely boxed in Vance's luxury sedan, their doors flying open before the vehicles had even come to a complete halt. A dozen federal marshals and Boston detectives, clad in body armor and carrying tactical weapons, swarmed the perimeter, creating an impenetrable wall of steel around the suspect. The lead Boston detective, a man whose father had been one of the original responding officers at the South End Brownstone in 2004, stepped directly into Vance's field of vision, produced a certified copy of the historic arrest warrant, and delivered the statement that dismantled 22 years of deception in a single breath. The look that passed over Vance's face in that precise second was captured on the tactical body cameras, a momentary, microscopic flash of absolute, ancient terror, followed immediately by a cold, vacant deadness that signaled the total surrender of his false persona. The news of the arrest broke across the city of Boston like a sudden, violent summer thunderstorm, shattering the quiet normalcy of the afternoon and sending a shockwave through every newsroom, legal archive, and neighborhood assembly in the Commonwealth. The media coverage was dawn-damp and relentless, with digital headlines screaming the paradox of the case to a public that had long accepted the narrative of Richard Vance's death. Boston 2004 cold case solved, victims missing, husband found living under a new identity. True crime online forums, digital broadcasting networks, and legacy print journalists instantly launched a massive, retrospective analysis of the original investigation, printing the side-by-side comparisons of the young, dark-haired 2004 surgeon and the elegant, silver-haired 2026 medical consultant. The city was gripped by a collective sense of Chandong curiosity and moral outrage. The Phantom of the South End had been dragged out of the shadows, and the public demanded to know how a man could commit an act of supreme domestic savagery and then spend a generation living as a celebrated prince of the medical establishment. Inside the high-security holding facility at the Suffolk County House of Correction, where Vance was transported under a specialized federal extraction protocol, the atmosphere was one of intense, legal preparation. The state was determined to mount a prosecution that would serve as a historic model for ultra-belated justice, utilizing an array of cutting-edge forensic methodologies that did not exist when the crime was committed. The district attorney assembled a dream team of forensic pathologists, digital archaeologists, and bloodstain pattern analysts, charging them with the task of rebuilding the 2004 crime scene from the ground up inside a digital environment. They were determined to ensure that when Richard Vance finally stood before a judge and jury at the Suffolk Superior Court, the passing of 22 years would not offer him a single square inch of legal shelter, and that the voice of Clara Vance, silenced so brutally in the winter of his greed, would finally echo through the halls of justice with an unassailable, devastating clarity. The transformation of the 2004 Boston cold case from an icy, forgotten ghost story into an active, high-velocity legal prosecution in the autumn of 2026 exposed a secondary, vastly more sinister layer of deception that extended far beyond a localized case of domestic homicide. As the initial public shock over Dr. Richard Vance's survival began to settle into a hard, collective demand for answers, a specialized division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, working in tandem with the Massachusetts State Police Cybercrime Unit, launched a comprehensive, retrospective digital asset recovery operation known internally as Operation Mirage. This was not merely a routine audit of a fugitive's bank accounts. It was a deep tissue extraction of an invisible, parallel financial empire that Vance had constructed beneath the floorboards of the global pharmaceutical market, an empire built entirely upon the weaponized, stolen genius of his murdered wife, Clara. For 22 years, the scientific and corporate communities had mourned Clara Vance as a tragic loss to the field of oncology, a brilliant mind snuffed out on the cusp of a medical revolution. Her revolutionary research into cellular synthesis, which proposed a methodology for mapping the specific genetic vulnerabilities of aggressive tumor lineages and delivering targeted molecular payloads directly to the cellular nucleus without damaging healthy tissue, had been classified as an incomplete, lost breakthrough. In the immediate aftermath of her 2004 death, her laboratory files at the biotech firm where she worked had been frozen, her personal hard drives examined by early forensic technicians, and the case closed with the assumption that the raw, proprietary data required to manifest her theories into physical, patentable therapeutics had disappeared with her. But when the cyberforensics teams under Operation Mirage successfully breached the multi-layered encryption of the quantum storage servers recovered from Vance's luxury Scottsdale compound, they discovered a horrifying truth. Clara's research had never been lost. It had been packaged, commodified, and systematically leaked to the international black market for scientific intellectual property by the very man who had claimed to love her. The digital archaeology required to untangle this network was an extraordinary feat of modern data recovery. Investigators in 2026 were forced to utilize specialized emulation software to recreate the obsolete operating systems of the early 2000s, tracking the digital footprints of encrypted emails and file transfer protocols that had been executed over primitive, long-abandoned networks. What they uncovered was a meticulous, cold-blooded chronicle of corporate espionage that predated the murder by more than 18 months. Richard Vance, utilizing his high-level credentials as a clinical advisor and his intimate access to the domestic space he shared with Clara, had been systematically downloading her daily laboratory logs, her raw molecular sequencing charts, and her proprietary synthesis algorithms. He had established a secure, anonymous communication channel with an unscrupulous offshore biotechnology syndicate based in a non-extradition European regulatory haven, offering them exclusive, unbranded access to Clara's revolutionary breakthroughs in exchange for massive, untraceable payments funneled through a labyrinth of shell corporations and blind trust accounts in the Republic of Panama. The timeline compiled by forensic data analysts revealed that by the winter of 2004, this illicit pipeline was on the verge of total collapse. Clara Vance, possessing an exceptionally sharp analytical mind, had begun noticing minor, inexplicable anomalies in her laboratory's digital access logs. She discovered that large blocks of her encrypted research files were being accessed during the early hours of the morning from a remote IP address that bypassed the corporate security firewall, an address that she eventually managed to trace back to the private residential server installed in the basement of her South End brownstone. The realization that her own husband was siphoning her life's work to fund an illicit offshore financial portfolio was a devastating, psychological betrayal that catalyzed the final, fatal confrontation. Investigators recovered a deleted draft of a highly confidential email written by Clara on the afternoon of December 11, 2004, addressed directly to the Compliance Division of the Federal Patent Authority, stating that she had uncovered definitive proof of systematic industrial espionage within her household and was preparing to surrender her personal hard drives for forensic inspection the following morning. She never got the chance. The data footprint proved that Richard Vance had accessed her personal email account via a hidden administrative mirror less than 2 hours after the draft was saved. Faced with the immediate, catastrophic destruction of his medical career, the exposure of his international financial corruption, and the certainty of a lengthy federal prison sentence for corporate theft, the surgeon did not hesitate. He did not draft a legal defense or seek a corporate compromise. Instead, he initiated a pre-planned, scorched-earth survival protocol that he had quietly engineered as a contingency mechanism. He understood that the oncoming blizzard of December 12th would provide the perfect, chaotic cover for a violent extraction, giving him the atmospheric noise and the physical isolation necessary to execute his wife, stage a multi-layered misdirection, and vanish into the skin of Dr. Arthur Sterling before the local police precinct could even establish a perimeter around the crime scene. The physical mechanics of the homicide, reconstructed through the lens of 2026 fluid dynamics modeling and advanced spatial forensic software, painted a picture of calculated, predatory ambush that completely horrified the trial jury. The digital reconstruction recreated the interior architecture of the South End brownstone in a three-dimensional virtual environment, mapping the trajectory of every drop of blood spatter and the precise physical vectors required to generate the structural fractures found on Clara's skull. The science proved that Clara had been sitting at her desk, her back to the doorway, her focus entirely consumed by the technical documentation she was organizing to expose her husband's crimes. Vance had approached her silently from behind, wielding a heavy, solid bronze statuette that he had removed from the living room mantelpiece, an object specifically chosen for its mass and its lack of identifiable serial markings. The initial blow had been delivered with immense kinetic force to the posterior parietal region of her skull, a strike intended to cause instantaneous incapacitation. But Clara, driven by a desperate, subcortical survival reflex, managed to rise from her chair, turning to face her attacker as she stumbled into the living room, her hands raised in an agonizing, futile attempt to ward off the subsequent impacts. The blood spatter architecture documented a terrifying, multi-room struggle, a sequence of violence where Vance pursued his bleeding wife through the elegant space, striking her repeatedly with the bronze instrument until she collapsed near the hearth, her life force escaping onto the historic wooden floorboards. The forensic pathologists noted that the final, lethal blows were delivered while Clara was already lying prone and defenseless on the ground, a clinical execution designed to ensure absolute, permanent silence. The subsequent 12 hours were a masterclass in sociopathic composure and environmental manipulation. While a ferocious New England winter storm raged outside the frosted windows, burying the city of Boston in feet of blinding white snow, Richard Vance moved through the brownstone with the methodical, unhurried precision of a surgeon performing a complex operation. He did not panic, he did not weep, and he did not leave a single erratic trace of his presence. He utilized specialized, medical-grade chemical decontaminants that he had secretly smuggled out of his hospital's surgical unit weeks prior, compounds designed to systematically break down cellular proteins and destroy DNA on contact. He meticulously scrubbed the bronze statuette, wiped down the handles of the desk drawers, and chemically erased his own biological footprint from every surface he had touched during the assault. He then executed the staging phase of the deception, a sequence of deliberate adjustments designed to exploit the specific blind spots of 2004 law enforcement methodology. He intentionally overturned heavy antique furniture, shattered expensive glassware across the foyer, and ripped open Clara's jewelry boxes, scattering gold and silver coins across the floor to mimic the chaotic signature of a violent, randomized home invasion or a target-rich burglary gone wrong. To create the ultimate, long-term misdirection, the illusion of his own abduction, he placed his personal leather wallet, his silver key ring, his cell phone, and his valid United States passport in a conspicuous, neat pile on the kitchen counter, ensuring that when the police eventually breached the home, their immediate operational priority would be split between investigating a homicide and searching for a prominent medical professional who had supposedly been snatched from his own residence by a ruthless pack of home invaders. Under the cover of the absolute whiteout conditions at 3:42 a.m., wrapped in generic, unbranded winter survival gear that he had purchased with cash at a remote sporting goods store months earlier, Richard Vance stepped out of the rear entrance of the brownstone. He avoided the streetlights, moving through the deep, drifting snow of the subterranean service alleys that ran behind the historic South End blocks. He carried nothing but a heavy, waterproof duffel bag containing his fraudulent identity documents, a massive reserve of physical cash, and the raw, unencrypted digital backups of Clara's research. A prearranged, cash-only private vehicle, driven by an associate from the underground gambling networks he frequented, an individual who had no knowledge of the homicide and believed he was simply facilitating a wealthy doctor's discreet marital flight, was waiting for him 3 blocks away at a designated commercial loading zone. By the time the storm cleared and the wellness check was executed 48 hours later, Richard Vance had crossed 3 state lines, effectively dissolving into the vast, anonymous topography of the American highway system. The failure of the initial 2004 police response to penetrate this web of deception was a source of deep, institutional trauma within the Boston Police Department, an issue that was dissected with brutal candor by investigative journalists following the 2026 arrest. The file revealed that the early detectives had been completely paralyzed by a phenomenon known within criminology circles as prestige bias. In 2004, the cultural status of a prominent thoracic surgeon from an elite Brahmin family was so immense that it acted as an automatic, psychological shield against direct suspicion. The police spent the first critical weeks of the investigation operating under the assumption that Richard Vance was a victim, a man whose life was in imminent danger, launching massive search parties into the woods of western Massachusetts and deploying dive teams into the freezing waters of the harbor, while the actual killer was comfortably sitting in a motel room in New Mexico, completing the final adjustments to his new legal identity as Dr. Arthur Sterling. This systemic division of focus allowed the trail to go completely, irrevocably cold. The physical evidence collected from the brownstone, hampered by the limitations of early DNA profiling and the destructive effects of the chemical cleaners Vance had deployed, yielded nothing but an empty, frustrating canvas. The local media, exhausted by the lack of structural updates, eventually turned their attention to other stories, leaving the Vance file to sink into the subterranean basement of the cold case archives. For 22 years, the case remained an urban legend, a cautionary tale of a brilliant couple destroyed by a faceless, nameless shadow in the middle of a historic blizzard. The memory of Clara Vance became a fading photograph in a newspaper archive, while her true killer thrived in the blinding, sun-drenched paradise of the desert Southwest, entirely insulated from the consequences of his savagery by a wall of stolen paper and a new, respected name. The collapse of this pristine, fraudulent paradise in 2026 was a direct result of the unyielding, mathematical progress of modern biometric surveillance infrastructure. When Richard Vance, operating as the distinguished medical consultant Dr. Arthur Sterling, walked into a federal licensing facility in Phoenix to secure high-priority clearance for an international pharmaceutical advisory contract, he believed he was performing a routine, administrative task. He had passed through basic security screenings for over 2 decades by maintaining a flawless paper trail, paying his taxes with absolute precision, and utilizing high-end corporate law firms to manage his professional assets. He did not comprehend that the modern multispectral iris and facial geometry scanners deployed by federal agencies in 2026 did not look at paper records or superficial physical signatures. They looked at the immutable, deep tissue architecture of the human skeletal system. The scanner's optical array projected low-frequency infrared beams through the surface layers of his dermis, mapping the precise spatial distribution of his facial bone structure, the orbital rim distance, and the microvascular network of his retinas, biological metrics that are fixed during embryological development and cannot be altered by cosmetic procedures, facelifts, or the natural atrophy of aging. The digital framework did not compare his scan to a localized database of driver's licenses. It ran his biological signature against a centralized, federal matrix of unresolved historical felony warrants. Within milliseconds, the algorithmic array bridged the 22-year gap across time and space, matching the elegant, silver-haired Phoenix billionaire directly to the Red Notice homicide file of the missing 2004 Boston surgeon. The silence of the computer terminal in that Phoenix office was the quiet, terrifying sound of a trap snapping shut across a generation, proving that in the modern world of 2026, the past is never truly buried. It is merely waiting for the technology of the future to come and claim its due. The structural collapse of the dual existence maintained by Dr. Richard Vance for over 2 decades escalated into a high-stakes legal warfare that, by the winter of 2026, placed the entire Massachusetts judicial system under a global microscope. The dramatic shift from a forgotten 2004 cold case to an active, tech-driven prosecution of an elite medical consultant exposed the profound vulnerabilities of early millennial law enforcement while showcasing the terrifying, unyielding power of modern algorithmic surveillance. As Vance sat inside his maximum security cell at the Suffolk County House of Correction, stripped of the desert wealth and the prestigious name of Dr. Arthur Sterling, his legal team initiated a desperate, multi-layered defense strategy designed to exploit the massive temporal gap in the state's case. They argued that 22 years of physical evidence degradation, the natural mortality of key witnesses, and the transition of technology had rendered a fair trial completely impossible, aiming to construct a procedural firewall that would shield their client from a definitive moral and legal reckoning. The primary legal battlefield materialized within the sterile, high-tech chambers of the Suffolk Superior Court during an intense series of pre-trial suppression hearings. Vance's defense counsel, a group of elite, high-priced criminal barristers specializing in constitutional privacy vulnerabilities, focused their opening salvos on the legitimacy of the federal biometric data that had catalyzed his arrest in Phoenix. They mounted a fierce, sophisticated challenge against the National Biometric Security Initiative's centralized matrix, claiming that the automated, non-consensual scanning of a private civilian's facial bone architecture and retinal vascular networks constituted a flagrant violation of the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches. The defense posited that the state had used an experimental, invasive digital dragnet to resurrect a dead file without probable cause, attempting to frame the modern identification of Richard Vance as an unconstitutional overreach of the surveillance state that should invalidate every piece of secondary evidence recovered in the subsequent investigation. The prosecution, led by an elite team of veteran state attorneys and forensic legal scholars, countered this constitutional assault with an unassailable mountain of legal precedent and technical documentation. They demonstrated to the presiding judge that a fugitive fleeing an active, historical first-degree murder warrant possesses no expectation of privacy regarding their identity, and that the biometric verification required for high-priority corporate and medical licensing is a voluntary regulatory standard, not a forced government intrusion. To solidify the legal foundation of the identification, the state introduced a secondary, undeniable biometric verification protocol that completely independent of the facial recognition network. Forensic technicians had successfully recovered the original physical fingerprint cards taken from Richard Vance when he first applied for his Massachusetts medical license in the early 1990s. Using 2026 ultra-high-resolution laser scanning digitizers, print analysts mapped the microscopic ridge deviations and sweat pore distributions of the historic ink samples, achieving a perfect, undisputed mathematical match to the physical hands of the elderly consultant arrested in Arizona. The biological signature was immutable. The man sitting in the courtroom was, beyond any shadow of a legal doubt, the missing husband from the South End brownstone. With the legitimacy of the arrest firmly established by the court, the investigative focus under Operation Mirage shifted toward the physical item that had served as the instrument of Clara Vance's violent execution, the solid bronze statuette that had sat on the mantelpiece of the historic brownstone for generations. In 2004, the forensic sweep of the weapon had yielded frustratingly incomplete results. The early luminol tests had revealed faint traces of biological material, but the rudimentary DNA amplification techniques of the era, hampered by the industrial-grade chemical decontaminants Vance had deployed across the crime scene, could only produce a degraded, partial genetic profile that was legally insufficient to secure an indictment against a missing suspect. The defense had long built their contingency plan around this limitation, believing that the physical passage of 2 decades had permanently eroded any residual cellular material that could link the weapon directly to the hands of their client. They had severely underestimated the revolutionary advancement of microscopic trace recovery. The bronze statuette was transported under heavy armed guard to the Advanced Molecular Biology Laboratories of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where a team of forensic nanotechnology specialists subjected the object to a process known as deep-layer thermal desorption mass spectrometry. This cutting-edge technique utilizes localized, precision microbeams of infrared light to gently agitate the metallic lattice of the bronze, expanding the microscopic pores of the alloy without damaging the historical artifact. As the metal expanded under the thermal array, the specialized vacuum extraction system pulled out microscopic cellular fragments that had been driven deep beneath the surface patina of the bronze by the sheer physical impact of the assault. The results returned from the laboratory were a devastating, multi-layered forensic catastrophe for the defense. Trapped within a microscopic, chemical tomb created by the reaction between the vintage metal polish Vance had used during his cleanup and the natural oxidation of the bronze, scientists recovered a pristine, dual-source biological profile. The first layer of DNA belonged indisputably to Clara Vance, her genetic material preserved in high concentration within the microfissures of the weapon's base. Directly beneath her profile, sealed by the hardened layers of ancient wax and chemical decontaminant, lay a substantial concentration of epithelial skin cells containing the exact genetic sequence of Richard Vance. The science had pierced through 22 years of chemical suppression and physical concealment, documenting the precise physical interaction between the hand of the surgeon and the skull of his wife, providing the jury with a visual, molecular map of an execution. Simultaneously, the Corporate Espionage Division of the task force was dismantling the intricate financial machinery that Vance had used to monetize Clara's stolen research during his decades of exile in the desert Southwest. Forensic accountants, tracking the digital undercurrents of the Phoenix consulting firm under the authority of federal asset forfeiture warrants, breached a series of heavily encrypted legacy database partitions that had been masked inside routine corporate tax filings. What they uncovered was a massive, multi-million-dollar trail of continuous intellectual property liquidation. Vance had not merely sold a single static file to the offshore European biotechnology syndicate in 2004, He had spent the subsequent 2 decades operating as a covert, highly paid scientific advisor for the group, systematically translating Clara's unfinished laboratory logs into active, commercial drug development pipelines. The financial ledgers revealed that every luxury asset Vance had acquired in Arizona, the gated Paradise Valley estate, the vintage European sports car collection, the private wealth portfolios in Nevada, had been directly funded by a series of structured, quarterly royalty payments tied to the global sales of a revolutionary targeted oncology therapeutic that had been brought to market by the European Syndicate in 2018. The therapeutic was built entirely upon the proprietary cellular synthesis algorithms that Clara Vance had developed in Boston before her life was violently extinguished. The ultimate, horrifying irony of the case was laid bare to the public. The accused killer had built a life of unimaginable opulence, prestige, and security by selling the very genius of the woman he had slaughtered, transforming her stolen legacy into a self-sustaining engine of personal enrichment while her true family drowned in a sea of unresolved grief. The moral outrage generated by these expanding financial revelations catalyzed a complete structural breakdown within the elite social and professional circles of Phoenix, where the man known as Dr. Arthur Sterling had reigned as a pillar of intellectual achievement. The corporate biotech startups that had paid millions for his consulting services scrambled to distance themselves from his name, launching internal audits to ensure that their own intellectual property portfolios had not been contaminated by his illicit operations. The philanthropic boards, the art galleries, and the high-end medical societies that had celebrated his presence for 20 years issued frantic public retractions, systematically erasing his name from their registries as they realized that the refined, charismatic gentleman they had embraced was a sociopathic fugitive who had funded his lifestyle with the blood of a murdered scientist. While his false world in Arizona was undergoing a rapid, permanent liquidation, the physical reality of the impending trial transformed the city of Boston into a theater of immense historical gravity. The local media coverage reached a fever pitch, with investigative journalists producing primetime documentary series that tracked the generational impact of the Vance case on the local community. The headlines remained dawn-dap and unrelenting, dominating every digital feed and evening broadcast. Boston 2004 cold case solved, victims missing, husband found living under a new identity. The public fascination was driven by a deep, collective desire to witness the final resolution of a tragedy that had haunted the South End for nearly a quarter of a century, a demand for a definitive demonstration that time, wealth, and the construction of a flawless disguise could not ultimately outrun the slow, majestic march of temporal justice. Inside the courtroom, as the formal trial finally commenced in the late autumn of 2026, the psychological contrast between the two sides of the aisle was palpable. The prosecution presented their case with a clinical, devastating precision, utilizing large-scale digital holographic arrays to project the three-dimensional virtual reconstruction of the 2004 crime scene directly into the center of the room. The jury sat in a breathless, heavy silence as the digital simulation recreated the exact spatial trajectory of the assault, demonstrating with mathematical certainty that the injuries inflicted upon Clara Vance could not have been the result of a randomized burglary, but were the signature of a targeted, deliberate execution carried out by an individual who possessed intimate knowledge of the home's layout and a desperate, survival-driven motive to silence the victim. Richard Vance sat in the glass-enclosed defendant's dock, his appearance remarkably changed from the refined, silver-haired consultant who had been arrested in the Arizona desert. By order of the court, he was required to appear without the benefit of cosmetic hair alterations or specialized aesthetic treatments, exposing the true, underlying architecture of his aging frame. Yet, despite the total collapse of his physical and social insulation, his face remained a mask of impenetrable, clinical detachment. He watched the holographic projections of his wife's fractured skull with the same cool, evaluating gaze he would have applied to a standard medical scan during his career as a thoracic surgeon, displaying a profound, terrifying reservoir of narcissistic psychopathy that chilled the blood of everyone in the gallery. The defense team, left with absolutely no viable scientific narrative to challenge the deep-layered DNA evidence or the financial trails, resorted to a desperate, psychological strategy aimed at creating a sliver of reasonable doubt in the minds of the jurors. They called a series of character witnesses from Phoenix, individuals who had known Vance exclusively as Arthur Sterling, who testified to his decades of unblemished public service, his gentle demeanor, and his immense contributions to the field of medical research validation. The defense argued that even if the court accepted the biological identification of the defendant as Richard Vance, the man standing before them in 2026 was fundamentally different from the individual who had inhabited that name in 2004, suggesting that a lifetime of exemplary, peaceful behavior in the desert Southwest should weigh against the circumstantial narrative of a 22-year-old tragedy. This psychological maneuver was completely vaporized when the prosecution initiated their cross-examination of the defense's character witnesses. The state's attorneys presented the witnesses with copies of Vance's private personal journals from Arizona, documents that had been recovered from his secret office safe during the federal raid under Operation Mirage. These journals, which Vance had maintained with a meticulous, coded precision for over 2 decades, revealed that beneath his charming, philanthropic public persona as Arthur Sterling, he harbored an intense, ongoing contempt for the very people who celebrated his status. The entries documented that he viewed his ability to deceive the elite social circles of Phoenix as a supreme intellectual game, a continuous confirmation of his own absolute omnipotence. He had not changed. He had simply perfected his camouflage, using the wealth generated from Clara's stolen breakthroughs to buy himself a position of complete moral insulation while actively celebrating his evasion of the law within the private pages of his diaries. The final, definitive blow to the defense's narrative came during the closing arguments of the trial, when the lead Crown prosecutor stood before the jury, holding up the heavy bronze statuette that had remained an instrument of silent terror since the winter of 2004. Looking directly at the defendant, and then turning his gaze toward the jury box, the prosecutor delivered a rhetorical summary that encapsulated the true, historical significance of the case. The defense has asked you to look at the passage of time. They have asked you to believe that 22 years is a long enough curtain to hide a monster. They want you to see an old man, a respected consultant, a pillar of a new community. But the science before you does not lie, it does not forget, and it does not allow itself to be seduced by a tailored suit or a false name. The DNA of Clara Vance, trapped beneath the pores of this bronze, has cried out for justice for a generation. Richard Vance did not build a new life in Arizona because he was a changed man. He built it because he was a successful killer who used the stolen genius of his victim to purchase his own paradise. Today, the technology of the future has torn away his mask, and it is your solemn duty to ensure that the concrete walls of justice finally close around the reality of his crime. The jury's deliberation was an exercise in absolute, swift consensus, lasting just over 2 hours before they signaled to the court officer that they had reached a unanimous verdict on all counts of first-degree murder, corporate larceny, and institutional fraud. As the forepersons stood to read the decision, a profound, breathless hush descended upon the historic courtroom, a collective holding of the city's breath that had been deferred since that freezing blizzard morning in 2004. The announcement of the word guilty sent a physical vibration through the gallery, a definitive, echoing snap that instantly brought a permanent, historical end to the fraudulent existence of Arthur Sterling. When the judge pronounced the mandatory sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, ensuring that the former surgeon would spend his remaining natural days within the stark, concrete confines of a maximum security state penitentiary, Richard Vance did not flinch, did not speak, and did not look back. He was led away in chains through the rear service doors of the courtroom, his path mirroring the dark, silent service alleys he had used to flee the South End brownstone 22 years prior. The ultimate legacy of the 2004 Boston cold case stands as a permanent, defining monument in the annals of modern American jurisprudence, a stark, unyielding proof that in the digital era of 2026, the past is never truly dead, no disguise is absolute, and the light of forensic truth will always possess the patient, devastating capacity to tear through the deepest layers of deception and demand a final, unevadable accounting. The legal and forensic finality achieved in the Suffolk County Superior Court did not mark the end of the narrative surrounding the 2004 Boston cold case. Instead, it ignited a profound, systemic shockwave that, by the winter of 2026, began to systematically dismantle the international networks that had facilitated Dr. Richard Vance's multi-million-dollar corporate evasion. As the steel doors of the maximum security state penitentiary closed behind the former surgeon, a joint task force consisting of federal asset recovery agents, international cyberforensic specialists, and white-collar crime investigators launched a secondary, highly aggressive phase of Operation Mirage. This was an unprecedented, global financial extraction aimed at tracking down the ghost entities, the complicit offshore wealth managers, and the elite biotechnology cartels that had actively bankrolled Vance's luxury existence as Dr. Arthur Sterling, translating his wife's stolen genius into blood-stained corporate dividends. The digital archaeology required to map this invisible financial grid pushed modern cryptographic data recovery to its absolute limits. Investigators focused their attention on a heavily fortified, cold-storage quantum data drive that had been recovered from a subterranean climate-controlled vault hidden beneath the garage floorboards of Vance's Paradise Valley estate. The physical drive was an obsolete, custom-built hardware configuration from the early 2010s, utilizing a localized, multi-layered encryption protocol that had been engineered by a rogue software syndicate operating out of Eastern Europe. To breach the device without triggering an automated, hardware-level thermal deletion sequence that would incinerate the internal magnetic platters, the Federal Cyber Unit had to construct a specialized, localized liquid nitrogen cooling rig, slowing down the processor's architecture until modern quantum decryption arrays could systematically peel back the digital defenses. When the encrypted sectors finally collapsed under the relentless processing power of 2026 technology, the true scope of Vance's global autonomy sent shockwaves through international financial regulatory bodies. The drive did not merely contain standard bank statements, it was a comprehensive, digitized operational manual detailing a continuous, multi-decade conspiracy of intellectual property laundering. Investigators uncovered a series of structural communication logs between Vance and the high-level executives of a Swiss-headquartered pharmaceutical conglomerate, proving that the corporate entity had been fully aware of the illicit, non-patentable nature of the cellular synthesis data they had purchased in 2004. The corporate hierarchy had willingly established a continuous, highly insulated shadow pipeline, funneling quarterly loyalty payments through a maze of dummy shipping companies in Hong Kong and private shell registries in the British Virgin Islands to ensure Vance could maintain his untraceable lifestyle in Arizona. The financial data proved that Vance was not an isolated fugitive hiding out of fear. He was a premier, operational white-collar asset who moved millions of dollars through the blind spots of the global capitalist machine while wearing a mask of philanthropic medicine. The records detailed that between 2010 and 2022, Vance had utilized his false identity as Arthur Sterling to act as an anonymous venture capitalist, quietly investing his illicit pharmaceutical wealth into a series of high-end real estate developments across the American Southwest and private medical technology startups in California. He had transformed his crime into a self-sustaining corporate empire, managing his identity like an elite offshore asset, completely insulated from the municipal law enforcement networks of New England by a fortress of high-end corporate lawyers, pristine fraudulent credentials, and an absolute control over his digital footprint. While the financial task force dismantled his offshore network, forensic geologists and spatial engineers returned to the physical site of the 2004 crime scene, the historic South End brownstone, to execute a definitive, microenvironmental study of the physical premises. Though the home had been boarded up and closed to the public for nearly a quarter of a century, modern non-invasive laser scanning equipment allowed architectural forensic teams to map the interior structure down to a microscopic scale. They discovered that the unique chemical compounds Vance had used to scrub the bloodstains from the living room floorboards had caused a long-term, subterranean chemical reaction with the underlying structural support beams of the house, trapping vaporized molecules of the original biological material within the cellular matrix of the historic oak wood. Using a newly developed methodology known as vacuum-assisted mass spectrometry extraction, forensic technicians isolated these trapped vapor molecules, separating the chemical elements of the industrial decontaminant from the underlying organic matter. The testing produced a flawless, chronological timeline of the cleanup operation that had occurred during the 2004 blizzard. The chemical signatures of the cleaner contained a distinct, localized mineral density profile that matched a specific production run from a Massachusetts industrial supply warehouse that had been delivered exclusively to the hospital where Vance worked as a thoracic surgeon 3 days before the murder. This physical, geological linkage completely neutralized the defense's lingering arguments regarding external third-party contamination, proving with absolute mathematical certainty that the tools used to erase the evidence of Clara Vance's death had been prepared by her husband's own hands within his own professional environment. The psychological fallout of these expanding disclosures on the surviving community of the South End and the medical circles of Boston was profound, precipitating a structural collapse of institutional trust that forced a complete national conversation regarding halo effect immunity. Investigative journalists published extensive dossiers demonstrating that throughout the early years of the investigation, senior police administrators and regional medical boards had actively discouraged aggressive, intrusive tactics against Vance because of his high social status, his aristocratic family lineage, and his position as a leading medical professional. The societal default setting of automatic deference toward individuals occupying positions of high prestige had functioned as an active, structural shield for a sociopathic predator, allowing him to walk out of a blood-drenched crime scene and disappear into the American highway system, while the system spent years chasing ghosts and hunting for his non-existent corpse. In direct response to the unprecedented regulatory failures exposed by the case, the United States Congress convened an extraordinary Select Committee inquiry in the spring of 2026, tasked with drafting sweeping federal legislation to modernize the monitoring of high-priority missing persons profiles and corporate identity validation. The resulting legislation, officially designated as the Clara Vance Accountability Act, stripped individuals holding high-level corporate, medical, or legal licenses of their historic exemptions from automated federal biometric cross-matching protocols. The law mandated that any professional entity operating within fields of high-stakes technological or pharmaceutical research must undergo a continuous, real-time biometric validation framework, ensuring that no individual could ever again utilize a dead man's paper credentials to hide a violent past or monetize stolen intellectual property within the American market. As the physical liquidation of Vance's fraudulent Arizona estate drew to a definitive close, the asset recovery team achieved an immense, poetic victory for the memory of the victim. Under the authority of federal asset forfeiture judgments, the multi-million-dollar Paradise Valley compound, the vintage European sports car collection, and the vast offshore private wealth portfolios were systematically auctioned off, generating tens of millions of dollars in liquid capital. These funds were transferred directly to the custody of the newly expanded Clara Vance Foundation, which announced the establishment of a permanent, fully funded global research network. The network was designed to provide unrestricted grants, state-of-the-art laboratory spaces, and high-security digital infrastructure for female scientists worldwide who are pursuing breakthroughs in targeted oncology therapeutics, ensuring that the scientific revolution Clara had died to protect would finally be realized, funded by the very wealth her killer had amassed through her betrayal. Inside the sterile, maximum security clinical wing of the state penitentiary, the physical deterioration of Richard Vance accelerated at a pace that matched the total destruction of his legacy. Stripped of the sun-drenched freedom of the desert, the luxury of his material wealth, and the prestigious protection of his false name, the 75-year-old inmate spent his days confined to a wheelchair, his mind remaining clinically sharp even as his physical frame succumbed to the rapid onset of degenerative bone disease. Prison logs indicated that he never requested a Bible, never expressed a single word of remorse to the medical staff, and consistently refused to participate in any psychological evaluation or restorative justice programs. He remained an island of unyielding, absolute narcissistic psychopathy, viewing his total exposure not as a moral failure, but as a minor, technical glitch in an otherwise magnificent life of supreme manipulation. The ultimate legacy of the 2004 Boston cold case stands as a permanent, historic monument in the history of global criminal jurisprudence, a definitive, unyielding proof that in the digital era of 2026, time has lost its capacity to protect the guilty. The historic brownstone in the South End has since been completely renovated, its boarded windows replaced with bright, modern glass structures, its interior converted into an independent public archive and educational facility dedicated to the study of forensic science and the protection of domestic violence victims. Near the entrance of the building, a simple, beautiful bronze plaque bears the image of Clara Vance, her face turned toward the light, an enduring reminder to every passerby that no matter how deep the grave is dug, no matter how perfectly the disguise is crafted, and no matter how many decades are allowed to pass, the truth remains an indestructible, patient force that will always find a way to tear through the concrete, dismantle the lies, and demand a final, absolute reckoning. The systemic explosion detonated by the resolution of the 2004 Boston cold case reverberated far beyond the corporate boardrooms of Switzerland or the high-security cells of Massachusetts, mutating into an unprecedented international legal and technological crisis by the summer of 2026. The definitive unmasking of Dr. Richard Vance had done far more than settle a 22-year-old domestic homicide. It had inadvertently exposed an architectural vulnerability within the global administrative state, a terrifying loophole that media networks and legal scholars quickly labeled the Sterling paradigm. The realization that a high-profile fugitive could systematically appropriate the identity of a deceased research scientist, bypass 22 years of municipal, federal, and international regulatory checks, and build a multi-million-dollar parallel empire inside the United States healthcare sector forced an immediate, emergency overhaul of identity verification protocols worldwide. Scotland Yard, Interpol, and the Department of Homeland Security found themselves inundated with retroactive audits as the terrifying truth became clear. If a surgeon could erase his past so completely, then the entire global framework of administrative trust was built on a foundation of sand. To manage the immense structural weight of this expanding international investigation, a Joint Intelligence Directive established a subterranean, high-security data command center within the secure subterranean levels of the John F. Kennedy Federal Building in Boston. This specialized facility, operating under the tactical designation Task Force Mirage, became the central clearinghouse for the comprehensive forensic deconstruction of Richard Vance's secondary networks. The walls of the command center were blanketed with high-resolution digital arrays projecting complex biometric timelines, algorithmic flows of offshore capital, and geographic heat maps tracing Vance's international travel patterns during his decades of absolute freedom. The atmosphere inside the facility was characterized by an intense, hyperclinical focus, an absolute contrast to the chaotic, sensationalized true crime media circus that continued to consume the public internet and digital broadcast networks on the streets above. Teams of data scientists, federal marshals, and international prosecutors worked around the clock, utilizing advanced predictive machine learning models to analyze thousands of archival missing person reports from the early 2000s, searching for anomalies that mirrored the precise methodology of identity appropriation that Vance had executed with such terrifying composure. The primary objective of Task Force Mirage during this aggressive phase was the absolute, granular reconstruction of the physical and bureaucratic pipeline Vance had utilized to acquire the clean, unblemished credentials of the late Dr. Arthur Sterling in late 2003. This was not a standard case of localized document forgery. It was an exercise in systematic institutional penetration. Investigators tracing the historical paperwork trail through specialized digital archaeology discovered that Vance had not merely stumbled upon Sterling's hiking fatality in the Pacific Northwest through casual public records. Instead, he had quietly established an anonymous, remote digital access portal into the centralized, secure mainframes of the Pacific Northwest Regional Health Registry, a primitive, early millennial digital database that possessed minimal network monitoring capabilities. Vance had utilized his high-level medical administration credentials in Boston to quietly browse through unindexed, out-of-state mortality logs, specifically searching for individuals who matched his precise demographic profile, physical age, and educational background, selecting Sterling as the ultimate biological canvas for his impending escape hatch. The data recovery operation revealed that once Vance identified his target, he executed a sequence of highly sophisticated, retroactive administrative maneuvers that completely manipulated the state's legal records. He utilized cash-bribed courier services and corrupt data entry clerks within remote county offices, individuals who had no concept of the impending homicide and believed they were simply expediting standard, out-of-state licensing updates, to systematically intercept and suppress the physical death registration documents before they could be processed by the Federal Social Security Administration. Simultaneously, Vance manufactured a flawless, parallel electronic paper trail, submitting fraudulent applications for replacement medical diplomas, updated corporate tax identification numbers, and localized driver's licenses under Sterling's name, ensuring that when he walked out of the blood-drenched South End brownstone in December 2004, the legal identity of Arthur Sterling was not just a collection of stolen numbers, but a living, breathing corporate entity waiting to be occupied by a ghost. As the physical logistics of this identity manufacturing network were systematically exposed, the Behavioral Analysis Unit at federal headquarters completed a groundbreaking psychological autopsy of Vance's transition, analyzing a massive collection of personal encrypted audio logs that had been recovered from a secure, biometric digital dictation system hidden within his Scottsdale consulting office. These audio files, spanning 15 years of his life as Arthur Sterling, provided an unprecedented, terrifying look into the internal architecture of a high-functioning narcissistic psychopath. Vance did not utilize the recordings to express remorse, fear, or a sense of running from the law. Instead, the logs were recorded in a cold, analytical monotone that resembled a surgeon delivering a post-operative clinical report. He spoke of his old life in Boston as a completed corporate phase, describing the brutal slaughter of Clara Vance as a necessary administrative liquidation of an immediate threat to long-term capital preservation. The audio analysis demonstrated that Vance possessed an extraordinary, sociopathic capacity for complete psychological compartmentalization. He had completely excised any trace of emotional attachment to his past, viewing his ability to operate at the absolute highest levels of the Southwestern medical establishment under a stolen name as a supreme validation of his cognitive superiority. He routinely recorded detailed reflections on his interactions with local politicians, corporate biotech CEOs, and high-ranking federal healthcare regulators, explicitly celebrating the reality that the individuals tasked with enforcing public safety and institutional integrity were entirely blind to the presence of a fugitive murderer sitting at their dinner tables. The psycholinguists noted that Vance maintained a profound, structural contempt for the very society that celebrated his status as Arthur Sterling, reinforcing his own sense of absolute omnipotence every time he signed a multi-million-dollar corporate validation contract with a name that belonged to a dead man rotting in a remote mountain ravine. The recovered data proved that Vance had not merely sold a static collection of research papers to the offshore European biotechnology cartel. He had used the deleted files to construct a dynamic, highly illegal intellectual property pipeline that functioned continuously for over 2 decades. The data revealed that whenever the European syndicate encountered a critical, structural bottleneck in their target drug development process, Vance would access his hidden digital archive of Clara's unreleased notes, translate her theoretical synthesis algorithms into actionable clinical instructions, and transmit the data through a series of anonymous space satellite communication networks to their research facilities in international waters. He was not a retired fugitive living off static stolen wealth. He was actively managing a continuous, high-velocity corporate espionage enterprise, utilizing the uncorruptible genius of his murdered wife as an intellectual wellspring to fund his opulent desert lifestyle, turning her life's work into a cruel, self-perpetuating engine of personal empowerment. The public exposure of this continuous, transcontinental betrayal induced a secondary wave of acute moral trauma within the scientific and medical establishments of both New England and the American Southwest. The realization that a revolutionary, life-saving oncology therapeutic, a drug currently utilized by thousands of cancer patients worldwide, had been brought to commercial realization through the systematic exploitation of a historical homicide created an unprecedented ethical and regulatory paradox. Major medical research universities and public hospital networks launched internal emergency tribunals to evaluate the moral legitimacy of the drug's ongoing deployment, while global patent authorities scrambled to strip the European syndicate of their illicit commercial rights. The consensus that emerged was one of profound, collective humiliation. The international medical establishment had spent years celebrating a breakthrough therapeutic without realizing that its development pipeline was drenched in the blood of a domestic execution and funded by a multi-decade identity fraud. While the international scientific community grappled with the ethical fallout, the physical reality of Richard Vance's incarceration remained a stark, unyielding demonstration of the absolute finality of modern temporal justice. Inside the maximum security medical infrastructure of the state penitentiary, the former surgeon was entirely separated from the vast material theater that had sustained his narcissistic ego for 22 years. He no longer commanded the expansive views of the Arizona desert or the luxury of his climate-controlled Paradise Valley estate. His physical environment was permanently restricted to a sterile, 10 by 12-foot concrete cell, monitored 24 hours a day by high-definition optical surveillance systems designed to prevent any self-harm or unauthorized communication. Medical records from the facility indicated that Vance's physical decline was progressing at a catastrophic rate, his skeletal frame buckling under the advanced stages of degenerative bone disease and the immense, sudden psychological shock of absolute societal exposure. Yet, according to internal prison intelligence logs, he maintained an unbending, arrogant silence, turning his back on the facility's medical staff, refusing to participate in any state psychological profiling research, and staring out the reinforced steel bars of his door with the cold, dead detachment of a predator caught in a permanent cage. The Clara Vance Foundation, operating with absolute authority under the historic federal asset forfeiture judgments that had liquidated Vance's illicit global estate, utilized its immense financial capital to execute a permanent transformation of the physical spaces that had been tainted by his crimes. The foundation announced the successful acquisition of the high-end commercial office complex in Scottsdale, where Vance had operated his fraudulent consulting firm as Arthur Sterling. The space was completely gutted, its opulent, glass and marble interior remodeled into a state-of-the-art independent forensic research institute and public accountability archive. The new facility was explicitly designed to train international law enforcement specialists, corporate compliance officers, and digital identity analysts in the advanced methodologies required to detect institutional infiltration, identity fraud, and elite white-collar crime, ensuring that the legacy of the 2004 tragedy would be transformed into a permanent, self-sustaining weapon against future high-functioning predators. In the late spring of 2026, as the multi-agency task force completed the physical extraction of Vance's remaining digital networks, a small team of architectural historians and forensic archaeologists were granted access to the interior of the South End brownstone in Boston, which had remained a boarded-up monument to violence since the morning of the blizzard. The cinematic footage captured within the space provided a haunting, definitive testament to the unyielding power of forensic truth. The historic home was completely silent, its air heavy with the dust of 22 years of abandonment, but the structural modifications executed by the task force had permanently rewritten the building's narrative. The original wooden flooring of the living room, where the fatal struggle had occurred, had been replaced with clear, high-impact structural glass, allowing light to pour directly into the subterranean levels of the house, exposing the deep, underlying support beams that had trapped the chemical signatures of the cleanup operation. It was no longer a dark sanctuary for a monster's secret. It had been permanently transformed into a transparent, historical monument to collective memory, a physical proof that in the modern era of 2026, no matter how deep the crime is buried, no matter how perfectly the false identity is crafted, and no matter how many decades are allowed to pass, the march of technological progress will always find a way to shatter the concrete, expose the monster, and demand a final, unevadable accounting. Before the eyes of the world,